My name is Allison and I am 29 years old. I have always tried to believe that family comes first no matter what. I am an elementary school teacher and I have spent my life making space for people, especially my sister Rachel. I thought, if I stayed patient, if I kept showing up, things would eventually get better between us. That belief shattered at Rachel's birthday dinner. The invitation had come in a thick white envelope with elegant gold lettering. It looked like a wedding invitation, not a birthday dinner. The restaurant was one of those places with a long waiting list and valet-only parking. I thought this was a chance for us to reconnect, to find some piece of the childhood bond we once had. I spent hours picking out the perfect gift. I found a vintage silver locket just like the one our grandmother used to wear, the one Rachel had lost years ago. I had it engraved with our grandmother's initials. It cost nearly my whole paycheck, but I didn't care. I just wanted to make her feel loved. When I arrived at the restaurant, the valet barely hid his surprise as he took the keys to my 10-year-old sedan. I could see the other guests pulling up in shiny luxury cars. I straightened my simple navy blue dress and walked inside holding the carefully wrapped gift. The restaurant smelled like fresh flowers and expensive wine. The hostess greeted me with a polite smile, checked the tablet, and led me toward the private dining section. As we walked, I scanned the tables looking for Rachel. I spotted her immediately. She looked flawless in a red designer dress, laughing with her husband, Brandon, and their circle of wealthy friends. The whole scene sparkled under the soft lights. Rachel waved when she saw me. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She kissed near my cheek, careful not to smudge her makeup. Brandon's handshake was brief, his eyes already moving past me. He said they almost thought I wouldn't show up. I handed Rachel the gift bag, my heart beating a little faster. I told her I wouldn't miss her birthday for anything. She said thanks, barely glancing at the package before dropping it onto a side table with the other gifts wrapped in designer store bags. Before I could say more, she turned to chat with someone else. Brandon offered to show me to my seat. He walked ahead, and I followed, expecting to sit with the rest of the guests. But he kept walking past the beautifully set main table to a smaller table tucked in the corner. The table was lower, the chairs smaller, and there were crayons and coloring sheets on top. I stopped, confused. Brandon turned to me with a slow smirk. He said this was the kids' table. Only important guests sit with the adults. I looked at him trying to process what he was saying. He nodded toward the empty seats and said I would probably feel more comfortable here since I work with children every day. I stood frozen, feeling the heat rush to my face. I glanced at the main table, where servers were pouring wine into crystal glasses. I looked back at the kids' table where plastic cups with lids were already set. Other guests nearby had paused their conversations, watching the scene unfold. I looked around for Rachel and found her standing across the room. She was watching, but made no move to help. I told Brandon there must be a mistake, that I would speak to Rachel. He shrugged and said it was her idea. I walked over to her, forcing my voice to stay steady. I told her Brandon had seated me at the children's table. She sighed like I was causing a scene. She told me the adult table was full with their friends and Brandon's work associates. She said she thought I would understand. Understand being humiliated like this? I asked. Rachel told me not to be so dramatic. She said it was just a seating arrangement. I said I would sit wherever they wanted, but they should at least set a place for me. She looked at Brandon, who had followed me over. They shared a glance that said everything. Rachel said there was no place setting for me. She said they weren't sure I would come since I always seemed so busy with my teaching. I reminded her I had RSVP'd weeks ago. She shrugged and said, I guess you're not that important. The words hit me hard. I stared at her. This woman who used to hold my hand when I was afraid of the dark. I realized this wasn't an accident. They wanted to show me my place. I took a deep breath. I said, then I'm leaving. I reached for the gift bag I had brought for her and wished her a happy birthday one last time. Rachel's expression faltered just for a second, as if she hadn't expected me to actually walk out. She said I was overreacting and warned me that if I left, I shouldn't expect another invitation. I told her I wouldn't want one. I turned and walked toward the exit. I heard people whispering as I passed, but didn't stop. I reached the valet stand, and the young man looked surprised to see me back so soon. He handed me my keys without a word. I drove away with the carefully wrapped locket still sitting on the passenger seat, now heavy with disappointment. I didn't cry right away. I kept my hands tight on the steering wheel, focusing on each green light each turn. But when I reached the quiet street near my apartment, the tears came fast, blurring everything in front of me. That dinner broke something in me. It was the night I realized my place in Rachel's life had become optional, disposable. It was the night I stopped waiting for her to choose me. When I think back to my childhood, the first face that always comes to mind is Rachel's. She was my older sister by 3 years, and for a long time, she was my entire world. We grew up in a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town where we shared bunk beds and whispered secrets after the lights went out. Rachel always slept on the top bunk because she said it made her feel brave. She used to lean over the edge and tell me stories until I fell asleep. We built blanket forts in the living room, rode our bikes until the street lights flickered on and defended each other from playground bullies. When I fell and scraped my knee, she was the first one to pull me up. When she lost her first middle school boyfriend, I was the one who sneaked cookies into her room. Our parents worked hard but never had much money. Still, they made our birthdays feel magical, and we had Sunday night dinners where everyone was expected to show up no matter what. Those dinners were our family's anchor. Rachel was always the bold one. She wanted to leave our little town, go to a big school, and build a life that didn't smell like laundry detergent and microwaved leftovers. I admired her ambition. I used to sit on her bed while she filled out college applications, dreaming about the day I could visit her in some big city. When she got accepted into one of the top colleges in the state, it felt like we all won. I remember how proud my parents were the day we dropped her off. She promised to call me every week. At first, she did, but slowly the calls became texts. The texts became rare. Rachel started moving in circles I couldn't follow. She met Brandon in her junior year, a guy from a family that owned half the buildings downtown. He took her to places with dress codes and wine lists longer than menus. She sent me photos of her wearing designer dresses at charity galas while I wore secondhand jeans to my part-time tutoring job. She changed quickly and I told myself it was just part of growing up. I chose to stay close to home, attended a local college, and became an elementary school teacher. I loved my work, even though it didn't come with big paychecks or luxury vacations. Watching my third graders learn to read was more rewarding to me than any salary. My life was small but full. I thought Rachel would understand that. She used to visit my classroom when she came home on holidays. She helped pass out snacks, sat on the carpet with the kids, and listened while they proudly read their stories. I thought she was proud of me back then. I thought she loved being part of my world. But somewhere along the way, she started pulling away. I noticed it at family gatherings first. She began introducing me to her friends with a light laugh. "She's just a teacher," she would say. It was small, but it cut deep. At first, I laughed it off. I told myself she didn't mean anything by it. Over time, the gap between us grew wider. She talked about trips to Europe and weekends at ski resorts while I spent my summers running literacy camps for struggling kids. She would cancel lunch plans at the last minute, sending quick texts about Brandon's business dinners or surprise shopping trips. The last real family event we all shared was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. I remember Rachel arriving late, dressed like she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine. Brandon didn't come. She stayed for less than an hour and spent most of it checking her phone. That was the last time I saw my parents and Rachel together in one room. When our parents died in a car accident a year later, it broke something in me. Rachel and I stood side by side at the funeral, but it felt like we were miles apart. I wanted to lean on her. I wanted us to be the family we had left. But even then, Rachel seemed distant, absorbed in her own life, speaking in soft, practiced words that didn't feel real. After they were gone, I kept showing up. I went to every dinner Rachel hosted. Even when her friends barely noticed I was there. I gave thoughtful birthday gifts, always hoping to remind her of who we used to be. She gave me generic gift cards in return, sometimes with my name misspelled on the envelope. I told myself it didn't matter. There was one time at a housewarming party when Brandon made a comment about my sensible shoes. He made air quotes as he said it. And his friends laughed. Rachel didn't defend me. She just shrugged like it was harmless. I swallowed the humiliation, told myself I was being too sensitive. I still remember when Rachel promised to meet me for coffee to plan our parents' memorial service. I waited for her at the cafe for over an hour. She texted later to say she had forgotten and was getting a facial instead. I stared at that message, reading it over and over, not sure whether to be angry or just tired. Even after all that, I clung to the good memories. I told myself family was complicated. I told myself she was busy. I held on because I didn't want to lose the only sibling I had left. Looking back now, I can see I was chasing someone who no longer existed. The sister who used to hold my hand when I was scared. The sister who taught me how to ride a bike. Who told me bedtime stories from the top bunk. That version of Rachel had been gone for a long time. I just couldn't bring myself to admit it. I spent 2 weeks searching for the perfect gift. I wanted something that would mean something, something that would remind Rachel of who we were before everything changed. I found it in a small antique shop on the west side of town. Tucked in a dusty glass case was a vintage silver locket almost identical to the one our grandmother used to wear. Rachel had lost hers years ago, and I remembered how upset she had been. I had the back of the locket engraved with our grandmother's initials. I spent nearly an entire paycheck on it, but it felt right. I wanted to give her something that would matter more than money or brands, something that would pull us back to a time when family meant everything. I wrapped it carefully, choosing silver paper and a soft white ribbon. I imagined the look on her face when she opened it. I imagined that maybe it would remind her of us. I bought a new dress for the dinner, a navy blue dress that was simple but elegant. I spent extra time fixing my hair, adding small curls like Rachel used to do for me when we were teenagers. I practiced polite conversation in my head, thinking of the things I could say to Brandon's business friends. I told myself this was a chance to start over. This was a chance to remind Rachel that I was still here. Still her sister, still the person who had always stood by her. I arrived at the restaurant early, parking my old car among rows of sleek black sedans and luxury SUVs. The valet glanced at my car, his face blank, but his eyes giving him away. He took my keys and I smoothed my dress, suddenly feeling like I didn't belong. Inside the restaurant was breathtaking. Tall ceilings, soft lighting, white linen tablecloths, and a quiet hum of low conversations. I gave Rachel's name to the hostess who smiled and led me toward the back where the private dining area had been reserved. My heart picked up when I saw Rachel. She was beautiful as always, wearing a deep red dress, her hair perfectly styled. She was laughing with Brandon and a few of their friends holding a glass of champagne like she belonged in that world. When she saw me, she waved with a small, controlled smile. She leaned in with an air kiss and told Brandon I had made it. He shook my hand briefly, his eyes already drifting past me. He told me they weren't sure I would come. I told him, of course I would. Rachel's birthday had always mattered to me. I handed her the carefully wrapped gift bag. She glanced at it and said, thanks, then placed it on a nearby table without a second look. She was already turning away to join another conversation. Brandon offered to show me to my seat. I followed him through the main dining area, expecting to join the other adults at the beautifully set table. But he kept walking past the crystal glasses and neatly folded napkins until we reached a small round table in the corner. It was lower than the others, and on top were coloring pages, crayons, and plastic cups with lids. I paused, confused. Brandon gestured to the table and told me this was my seat. I stared at him, unsure if I had heard him right. He smiled in that way that wasn't really a smile. He told me only important guests sit with the adults. He said I was probably more comfortable here since I worked with children all day. I felt my face go hot as the room around me seemed to quiet. A few people nearby glanced in our direction, their expressions hovering between curiosity and discomfort. I turned searching for Rachel. She was standing across the room watching us. She didn't move. She didn't say anything. She just turned back to her conversation, leaving me standing there. I told Brandon there must be a mistake. I said I would go speak with Rachel. He shrugged and told me the seating was her idea. I crossed the room, careful not to stumble in my heels. I told Rachel quietly that Brandon had seated me at the kids' table. She sighed as if I was the one causing a problem. She said the adult table was full. She said Brandon's business associates were there and they needed those seats. I asked if she realized how humiliating this was. She told me not to be dramatic. She said it was just a seat. I told her I would sit anywhere, but I needed a place setting. She glanced at Brandon who had followed me. They shared a look and then Rachel said there wasn't a place setting for me. She said they weren't sure I would come. She shrugged and said, I guess you're not that important. It wasn't the words alone that broke me. It was the ease with which she said them, like they didn't carry any weight, like they were just facts, like I didn't matter. I looked at her and for a brief second I thought maybe she would realize what she was doing, but she didn't. I said, then I'm leaving. I reached for the gift bag I had brought for her and wished her a happy birthday. Her face flickered like she hadn't expected me to actually walk away. She told me I was overreacting. She told me if I left I shouldn't expect another invitation. I told her I didn't want one. I turned and walked toward the exit, each step feeling heavier than the last. I heard whispers behind me, but I didn't turn around. The valet handed me my keys without speaking. I slid into the driver's seat, the gift bag still on the passenger side. I drove slowly, my chest tight, my throat burning. I wanted to believe I was wrong, that this was all some misunderstanding, but deep down I knew it had never been a mistake. It had been a choice. Rachel had chosen her friends, her image, her comfort. She had chosen Brandon's world over me. When I reached my apartment, I sat in the car for a long time. I kept my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The locket sat untouched beside me, the silver ribbon, still perfect. I had chosen that gift with love. I had imagined it would bring us closer. But now it sat between us like a reminder that I would always be on the outside looking in. I didn't bring the gift inside right away. I left it in the car that night. I sat in the dark, breathing through the ache in my chest, replaying every moment of that dinner. It was the night I finally stopped pretending. It was the night I realized that sometimes choosing yourself means walking away, even when it breaks your heart. I spent the next few days moving through life in a daze. I went to work, smiled at my students, and graded papers, but my mind was somewhere else. The birthday dinner replayed over and over, the scene stuck on a loop. I kept hearing Brandon's smirk, Rachel's cold words, the scrape of plastic chairs at the kids' table. The memory wrapped around me like a tight band I couldn't loosen. When I finally told Carrera what happened, I expected her to tell me to forgive Rachel, to try again to keep the peace, but she didn't. Cara showed up at my apartment that same night with a bottle of wine, a bag of chocolate chip cookies, and a look that told me she was ready to fight for me when I couldn't. I told her everything. I told her about the kids' table, the missing place setting, Rachel's words, Brandon's smirk. I told her about the small humiliations that had been building for years, the cancelled plans, the careless introductions, the gift cards with the wrong names. Each story tumbled out faster than the last, like I had been holding them in for far too long. Cara listened without cutting me off. When I finished, she told me something no one else had ever said. She told me that what Rachel had done wasn't just rude. It was emotional abuse. And I didn't have to keep accepting it. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long explaining away Rachel's behavior that I had never stopped to name it. I had never called it what it was. I thought that because we were family, I was supposed to keep showing up no matter how much it hurt. That night, Carrera helped me see a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. She reminded me that the people who love us don't make us feel small on purpose. They don't humiliate us and call it a joke. In the days that followed, I started pulling back the layers of what I had accepted. I thought about the time Rachel forgot to tell me about our cousin's wedding until the day before. I thought about the family Christmas where I was the only one to Receive a generic gift card. I thought about all the times Brandon had made cutting comments while Rachel stood by and said nothing. It wasn't just the birthday dinner. It was years of being pushed aside, minimized, made to feel like a burden. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old storage box in my closet, I found my mother's journal. I had packed it away after her funeral, not ready to face the weight of her words. I sat on my bedroom floor, carefully turning the pages, not sure what I was hoping to find. In an entry written just a few months before the accident, she wrote about Rachel and me. She said she worried that Rachel was changing. She said she hoped we would find our way back to each other before pride built walls too high to climb. I ran my fingers over her handwriting, hearing her voice in my head as I read. My mother had seen what I refused to see. She had noticed the cracks, the distance, the way we were slipping away from each other. She wanted us to hold on. In another entry, she wrote that I had always been the one to keep the family together. She worried that I was carrying too much. She said she hoped I would remember to take care of myself, too. Her words stayed with me, threading themselves into the quiet spaces of my days. I realized I had spent years trying to hold on to a version of my sister that no longer existed. I had been carrying the weight of our family on my back, afraid to let it fall. Afraid of what it would mean if I stopped trying. I decided I couldn't carry it anymore. I called a therapist that Kara recommended, someone who specialized in family boundaries. The first session was harder than I expected. I had trouble saying the words out loud. I kept stumbling over the idea that I wasn't obligated to keep accepting Rachel's behavior just because we were sisters. The therapist told me that love without respect isn't love. She told me that setting boundaries isn't punishment, it's protection. I sat with those words for days. We talked about patterns, about emotional weight, about guilt and loyalty, and the tangled roots of family. I realized that I had built my identity around being the dependable one, the one who always forgives, the one who never walks away. But that wasn't strength. That was fear. Over the next few weeks, I worked to untangle that fear. I learned that boundaries aren't walls meant to push people out. They are doors that we can choose to open or close depending on how we are treated. I realized I needed to stop waiting for Rachel to become the sister I remembered. I needed to accept the sister she had become, even if that meant stepping back. The hardest part was deciding whether to close the door completely or leave it open just a crack. I thought about the locket still sitting in my car. I thought about our childhood forts, our whispered secrets, our matching bracelets. I didn't want to erase those memories. I didn't want to give up on her entirely. So I chose to leave the door open, but I made sure she would know the conditions. I sat at my kitchen table one evening and wrote her a letter. I told her that despite everything, I still cared about her. I told her that I wanted her to be well. I told her that I wouldn't tolerate being treated like I didn't matter. I said I was here if she ever wanted to reconnect, but I wouldn't come back to a version of our relationship where I had to shrink myself to fit. I made it clear that I was no longer willing to play the part she had written for me. I signed the letter and slipped it into an envelope. I sent it to her office, not her home, because I knew Brandon sometimes intercepted her mail. I wanted to be sure she would read it. When I let the envelope fall into the mailbox, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. I had done what I could. I had left the door open, but I had also chosen myself. That choice didn't come with fireworks or applause. It came with a quiet sense of peace that settled over me as I walked back to my car. I didn't know if Rachel would answer. I didn't know if she would even read the letter, but I knew I had finally stopped chasing someone who didn't want to be caught. That was enough. I came home late that evening, arms full of groceries and my mind already spinning through the lesson plans I needed to finish. I didn't notice the small white envelope on the floor until I almost stepped on it. I picked it up and saw my name written in Rachel's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just 3 words. I need help. My heart slammed against my ribs. I dropped the bags on the counter and called her cell. It rang until it went to voicemail. I called her office line, but no one picked up. I called Carrera, hoping she might know something, but she hadn't heard from Rachel in weeks. I spent the rest of the night pacing my apartment, listening for every car door, every footstep outside. It was nearly midnight when my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Rachel was standing there holding a small suitcase. She looked like a shadow of herself. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She wore jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, no makeup, no designer shoes. She said she didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside and told her to come in. She moved slowly like her body weighed more than it should. I didn't ask questions. I just asked if she was hungry. She nodded, her lips trembling. I reheated leftover pasta while she sat silently at my kitchen counter, her fingers picking at the edge of her sleeve. When I placed the plate in front of her, she whispered thanks. She ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. When she finished, she wrapped her arms around herself and finally began to talk. Brandon was gone. His investment firm had collapsed. Federal investigators had seized their assets and their house was being repossessed. Brandon had quietly moved large amounts of money to offshore accounts in his name alone and disappeared 3 days ago. Rachel's voice cracked when she said it. She had been left behind to deal with the mess. She told me the people she thought were her friends had vanished overnight. She had nowhere to go. She had no access to the money. Everything she built her life around had crumbled. I asked if she knew what Brandon was doing. She said she suspected. She said it was easier not to ask questions. She said she was afraid of what the answers might be. She said she didn't know how to leave because she was too afraid of losing everything. She admitted she thought she could hold it all together if she threw the right parties and wore the right clothes and smiled in the right photos. She had believed that if she looked perfect, no one would look too closely at the cracks. We sat there in the quiet, both of us carrying different kinds of grief. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. I told her I wasn't going to bring up the past tonight. I just wanted her to feel safe. Over the next few days, she settled into the small guest room in my apartment. She folded her clothes neatly in the drawers, washed her dishes carefully, kept the space clean like she didn't want to take up too much room. She spent hours on the phone with investigators. Her voice low and steady, answering their questions. Untangling the damage Brandon had left behind. At night, we sat on the couch together watching quiet movies. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. Sometimes the silence felt heavier than words, but not uncomfortable. She started opening up in small pieces. She told me she had always envied me, though she had never admitted it. She Said, I always seemed so steady, so content, so sure of myself. She had wanted that feeling. She had thought she could build it with money and reputation, but it never lasted. I told her I had envied her, too. I had envied her confidence, her ability to command attention, her social ease. I told her I thought she had it all figured out. She laughed quietly, her shoulders dropping as if she was letting go of something she had held for too long. She said she had nothing figured out. She said she had just gotten better at pretending. There were moments when the old Rachel peeked through. She would make comments about my small kitchen or my simple furniture, and then her eyes would widen in guilt as she caught herself. I told her I noticed, but I also told her I knew habits didn't break overnight. We moved slowly, carefully, like we were rebuilding something fragile. She helped me grade papers in the evenings, asking about my students and smiling when I told her stories about their wild imaginations. She joined me on walks through the park where she wore sneakers instead of heels and let the wind pull her hair loose. One morning, she made us pancakes and arranged the plates neatly at the table. When I sat down, she gestured to the chair across from me and told me it was my seat. She said it softly, but it meant everything. She started looking for work, wanting to earn her way back on her own terms. She found a job as a receptionist at a small nonprofit, far removed from the luxuries she had known. She told me she wanted to know who she was without Brandon, without the fancy house, without the expensive car. She said she wanted to build something that wouldn't crumble the second someone walked away. I didn't push her to talk about the past, but she did anyway. She said she regretted so much. She regretted the birthday dinner. She regretted the way she had made me feel like an outsider in my own family. She said she had been so desperate to protect her image that she didn't realize what she was destroying. I told her I had wanted her to see me not as a role to fill, but as a person worth sitting at the same table. I told her that was all I ever wanted. She promised. She was trying to become someone who could do that. I believed her. Our days found a rhythm. We cooked simple meals, folded laundry together, talked about nothing and everything. She helped me set the table for small dinners with my friends, people who had stood by me when I had walked away from her world. She made room for herself at that table, not as someone special, but as someone present, someone welcome. Slowly, the distance between us shrank. Slowly, I stopped holding my breath around her. The cracks between us didn't disappear, but they stopped widening. And that was enough. On a quiet Saturday evening, Rachel and I hosted a small dinner in my apartment. It wasn't the kind of event she used to plan. There were no place cards, no expensive flower arrangements, no polished silverware. Just a simple wooden table, home-cooked pasta, and the people who had been there when things fell apart. Cara brought her usual chocolate chip cookies, and a few of my coworkers from school joined us, the same ones who had listened and supported me through everything. As we set the table together, Rachel carefully placed each plate and fork, moving with quiet attention. When she reached the last chair, she paused. She pulled it out for herself and gave me a small smile. She said, "This one's mine." It was just a seat, but the meaning settled deep inside me. She was no longer deciding where I belonged. She was claiming her own place, not above anyone, not apart from anyone, just here. At the table with me. We ate, we laughed, we told stories that didn't involve the past or the people we used to try so hard to impress. Rachel didn't shrink from the simple moments. She let herself be part of them. I watched her listen closely when my friends talked about their students and their families. She asked real questions, not the kind that just filled silence. When the last plate was cleared, we sat together, our chairs side by side. I looked at her and realized I had stopped waiting for her to return to the sister I used to know. She was becoming someone new, and maybe I was too. The space between us wasn't perfect, but it was honest now. Family should be a place where we grow, not a place where we accept mistreatment. It should be where we can show up as we are without needing to shrink or perform. It took me a long time to learn that. I spent years believing that love meant always forgiving, always bending, always showing up no matter the cost. But real family isn't about holding on at any price. It's about making space for each other to be whole, to be seen, to be respected. I hope our story reminds you that you can choose what family means to you. You can set boundaries. You can step away from what hurts, even when it's wrapped in familiar faces. And sometimes when the door stays open, the people who truly matter will find their way back. If you've ever had to set boundaries with family, I would love to hear your story. How did it change you? How did it change them? Please share in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, I hope you'll like and subscribe so we can keep sharing these moments of healing together. Thank you for listening.